Mr. Speaker, sir, this morning I presided at a meeting of the Cabinet and had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall be having further meetings later today, including one with the President-elect of Brazil.
To Robert McLennan.
In expressing for the whole country our great joy in witnessing the unimaginable leap forward in the Soviet Union towards political pluralism and liberal democracy, will the Prime Minister give some thought to celebration by taking small steps towards reinvigorating our own democracy? In particular, though I don't suggest that she should submit herself for popular election as our President, will she throw her weight behind greater openness and accountability by a Bill of Rights, a Freedom of Information Act, decentralization of government, and a fair voting system in this country?
Mr. Speaker, I share the honourable gentleman's pleasure at the increasing democracy in the Soviet Union and hope that the decisions taken in the last few days will be speedily implemented. There was, of course, a Bill of Rights in this country in about the 17th century, the honourable gentleman will recall. With regard to decentralisation, this government has done more to decentralise powers from central powers from central government to people than any other previous one, whether it be by reducing taxation, whether it be by denationalising industries, whether it be by allowing parents more say in schools or people more say in the running of hospitals.
Mr. William Powell.
Is my right honourable friend aware that the East German state is now close to collapse, that mutinies have been reported in its army, that 3,000 people a day are leaving for the West, which means 1 million people a year, that over half its qualified doctors have left, and is not the only way in which this massive tide can be stemmed is if there is unification between the two Germanys as quickly as possible. And will my right honourable friend do all that we can to encourage the West Germans to assume responsibility for East Germany as quickly as possible?
Mr. Speaker, I read the same report as the honourable gentleman about conditions in East Germany after so many years of socialist communism and is near a state of collapse. The elections are in fact due in March, and I think they will probably be very decisive, and they will probably lead to the unification of Germany. I think it's absolutely vital that there be a transition stage between that decision in principle and sorting out the full implications for NATO, for the Helsinki Accords and for Berlin, so that the unification of Germany does not come about at the expense of security and stability in Central Europe.
To Roy Hattersley.
Will the Prime Minister give a categoric assurance that while she remains in office, child benefit will be universally available to all families with children?
Speaker, I stand by our commitment in the manifesto, which I have repeated many times. This government stands by its commitment about child benefit in the manifesto.
Well, since the promise in the manifesto has been broken for the last 5 years, nobody must expect anything from that answer other than the preparation for abandoning universal child benefit. May I ask the Prime Minister if she is aware of how many low-income families are always penalised by benefits which are means-tested? Does she realise that very many of the family benefits which are now means-tested are only taken up by 50% of those people who need and deserve them? Does she know these facts, or does she not know them? And if she knows them, does she care?
Mr. Speaker, this government has put more into helping the poorer families, than previous governments. In the last 2 years, the extra help has been In the last 2 years, the extra help has deliberately been concentrated on poorer families. Had those on income support or family credit merely had an increase in child benefit, it would not have profited them because it would have come off income support or family credit. Having concentrated in the way we have on increased family credit and increased help for those poorer families, we have done far better by them than other governments.
Since the Prime Minister runs away from answering the question about take-up of family credit, let me invite her to answer questions not from me, but from her own backbenchers put to her last night. How does she reconcile a policy that gives tax concessions for free medical care, but holds down child benefit? And what has she to say to the Honourable Gentleman for Aylesbury, who says year by year the manifesto promises of her party and his look increasingly threadbare?
The right honourable gentleman is talking nonsense. The manifesto commitment was that child benefit will continue to be paid as now direct to the mother. That has been upheld. As I indicated in my answer to the last question, on poor families this year and next, we're making extra £70 million available to the neediest families through income-related benefit. That is specially helping the poorest families. And fortunately, because of our tax policies, we have had far more to spend on social security. Well over £50 billion now, over £1 billion a week than any previous government. We win, all ends up.
Sir Peter Emery.
Mr. Speaker, will my right honourable friend, during her very busy day, make it absolutely clear that budgeted increases in spending of 10, 12 or 15% for next year, if carried through by local authorities, are bound to be very inflationary and entirely contrary to government policy?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I totally agree with my honourable friend. They would be inflationary, they would have led to enormous increases in rates, and they will lead to a community charge which is higher than need be. This government, the extra support that has gone to local authorities this year has been 8.5% above the similar rate support grant plus business rates last year. That is sufficient for local authorities to plan well and economically.
Sir Russell Johnston.
Number 2, sir.
I defer the honourable gentleman's reply, which I gave some moments ago.
Russell Johnston.
The Prime Minister has just welcomed and praised President Gorbachev's extraordinary achievements. Would she agree that these could be swept away by the grim and accelerating deterioration in the Soviet economy, and that therefore the logic that has led us to help Poland and Hungary must make the West face up to the necessity of bringing aid to the Soviet Union itself? And would she discuss this with her European community colleagues, with President Bush and President Gorbachev?
Mr. Speaker, I think that the increasing freedom of speech, discussion and movement will not be swept away, but I entirely agree with the honourable gentleman that it is critical to get economic improvement, and that is much more difficult than securing political improvement, because of course it requires the full cooperation of people, and people who've never had any experience of running free enterprise or of taking responsibility for themselves. I don't think any help that we could give, I believe, would only be marginal on maintaining in the Soviet Union. We are helping with some joint ventures, but some of them are in difficulty because it's still a very bureaucratic system there. And we're also helping with having people over here to management training and doing everything we can in that respect. There are commercial banks, of course, have a line of credit which is not fully yet taken up.
To John Brown.
Number 3, sir.
I refer my honourable friend to reply which I gave some moments ago.
Order.
And accept that of all the ideas for raising local government finance, the socialist idea of a roof tax is the most unfair, uneconomic and unworkable. And that it will involve constant revaluation, the erosion of local democracy.
Order. Well, order. Well, I order. I can't hear what the honourable members, whether he's in order or not. What I must say to him is he must relate his question to the government's responsibility, please. Must relate his question to the government's responsibility.
Will my right honourable friend assure the House that she will not have a positive reaction to that proposal? And remember that whereas the window tax forced people to live in the dark, this roof tax is likely to force them to live in sentry boxes.
Well done. Mr. Speaker, I assure my honourable friend we should not introduce a roof tax which is based on capital valuation of houses, regardless of whether they are owned or whether a tenant lives in them, which would be grossly unfair, both to tenants and particularly to pensioners, and therefore we shall never introduce it. Also, I may say to my honourable friend, as a Thatcher, I object to a roof tax.
Tom Clark!
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
I refer the honourable gentleman to reply which I gave some moments ago.
Mr. Clark.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister accept that her replies on child benefit this afternoon will come as a great disappointment to 7 million families and 12 million children in Britain? Far from helping the poor, will she accept that this year the government's policies saved £250 million at the expense of 70 million? And since for the last 3 years the government has failed to uprate child benefit, will she uprate child benefit in April, taking those last years into account? Or does she intend simply to save up more and more money for an even more generous budget for the rich?
She don't care about them.
Mr. Speaker, people throughout the whole of the United Kingdom at all income levels have benefited, as today's family expenditure survey shows, from the higher standard of living gained by the increased output which this country has had during Conservative government, and the social services have benefited as well. With regard to child benefit, the poorest families on income support and on family credit would not benefit from an increase in child benefit, because it would come off the income support and family credit which they would be given. So we chose the very best way to help the poorer families, and I should have thought that the honourable gentleman would have preferred that, instead of which he seems to prefer child benefit to go to the richest families.
Mr. Teddy Taylor. Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Speaker, after meeting with the representatives of the New Zealand government on Tuesday, did she take the opportunity of congratulating them on the lead they have given to the world in abolishing agricultural subsidy? And doesn't she believe that this excellent Conservative principle has brought benefits to the taxpayer and to the consumer? And was she also able to give them the assurance that she will ensure that British housewives will still be able to buy New Zealand butter if they wish to buy it?
Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend knows, I did not exactly put that point to the New Zealand government, but they were very grateful to us for the stand we've taken in supporting them in negotiations with the economic community. When it comes to subsidies on agricultural produce, that will have to be negotiated in the GATT through the European community and together with other countries which pay heavy subsidies, such as the United States and Japan as well.